Hey everyone. So today I want to talk about the proofing process, proofreading, proofing, whatever you want to call it. When you are an author, and I include both traditionally published authors, indie published authors in this, as well as small presses, however you want to define yourself as an author, the odds are that you will, and this is certainly true with traditional publishing, you will go through a proofreading process as part of the editing process. The editing process typically can happen in several steps. You'll get edit letters. I've talked about this in other videos. And typically revisions and edits start with sort of big picture and tend to, not always, but tend to get sort of more and more to a fine-toothed comb point, for lack of a better term. So definitely happens in traditional publishing, but even for indie authors, if you are completely responsible for putting your own work out there and you are trying to make it as strong as it can be, which is really, really important. I think most people know this who are going into the indie author life. You kind of know it's really important to put your best foot forward, to put your best work forward for readers. So you need to, if you want to do that, if you want to turn out a really high quality product, you need to also put yourself through a proofreading process. One of the projects that I worked on this fall, and I'm super proud of, and it just was really a high point of the year for me, and especially as the founder of Altitude Press, this was a high point. We put out, and just put out, it just came out a few weeks ago, a flash fiction Christmas anthology. So here's my little plug for that. It's called a Flash Fiction Christmas, 12 stocking stuffer size stories. I worked with 12 different authors. I'll kind of slowly bring it toward the camera, hoping it stays in focus. I don't know if you can read that. We'll see if I'm able to flip this video and make the text appear correct rather than backwards. But it was a lot of work. It was in many respects a labor of love. The authors have just been fabulous. And we went through edits with every single author because even though the stories that were sent into the press for this anthology were very strong, I didn't tend to accept stories that really needed a lot of work because we're a tiny little micro press and I just don't have the resources for that, especially since I have a day job that is teaching. I have a very full teaching load this semester. So I just knew that I needed to start with strong products, but even when you start with a strong product, typically there's still a revision and editing process that needs to occur to some extent. Some of the stories needed a little more editing, some needed a little less, but they all went through an editing process. And then toward the end of that editing process, once the authors pretty much had signed off on their work, their part was sort of done. Next comes the formatting and the uploading phase and actually making it look like a book. So the first time you do this, and I'm going to focus on Amazon here. The first time you do this on Amazon for a paperback or a hardcover, you're not totally sure what you're going to get. I mean, maybe if you've done this dozens of times and it's just you could do it in your sleep kind of thing, but every project I've found is a little different. This anthology was formatted differently from our first anthology, and so things were new. I was using different design, different fonts. I added little Christmas trees to the start of each story. I don't know if you can see that there. And I used Atticus formatting software, which I have used multiple times now. I really like it. It does entail a learning curve, but I find it's a really consistent way to get manuscripts to look the way you want them to look, but not necessarily the first time. So the first time that I had this uploaded, I had the cover uploaded, I had everything right on Amazon, and the ebook was already out. At this point, had been out for a few weeks. But I definitely wanted to have this out in paperback because it is sort of a stocking stuffer book. I went ahead and uploaded the paperback without hitting publish because I knew I wanted those proof copies, those author copies, so that I could check and see what everything looked like, make sure the product is solid before it goes out for sale so that people aren't getting books that have strange formatting or typos or strange design issues, what have you. So my first attempt at uploading it, it looked great on Amazon, by the way. When you go into KDP and you set up your book, you set up your paperback, you can get a look at how it's going to look but it turns out it's not always how it's going to look. So please do yourself a favor. Order those proof copies. They're typically very reasonable, a couple bucks plus shipping. And it is so, so worth it. So the first time I did it, and again, the lighting is not great in my little vintage trailer here, but I don't know if you can see, but there is a white line along the top of the cover. Definitely not supposed to be there, and not obnoxiously bad, but bad enough where I thought, boy, that's not good. I really don't like that. Other than that, it looks pretty good. This gray bar across the front is just a not for resale tag so that you're not buying these super cheap author copies and then trying to resell them. I'm thinking is probably the thing there. So it just shows that this is a proof copy. This is not meant to be sold yet. This is in review still. So that's the first thing I noticed. I had this weird line. Also on the spine, which is it's a collection of 12 stories, so it's not a huge anthology. So the spine spacing was a little tricky. I noticed there was a little bleed from the back image, and the back image looked pretty good, but there was some bleed onto the spine. The text wasn't exactly centered. So for me, as the person responsible for putting this product out there on behalf of these authors, this was not good. And honestly, even if it had been my own book, I wouldn't have been thrilled with that. That wasn't Amazon's fault, by the way. That is just kind of how it goes when you are working with formatting software, uploading to KDP, putting it in a hard copy form so it's not just a Kindle ebook. That's just kind of how it goes. So then I thought, okay, so we've got some issues, right? Front, back, and spine. We're already definitely going back to the drawing board with this. Then what I discovered, okay, title page, that's looking good. I like it. That's pretty much how I wanted it to look. A little bit of a mirror of the front cover. I look at all the details here. Well, I can't turn these pages. Copyright page looked good, but I thought, boy, that font's pretty small, even for a copyright page. And copyright page font can tend to be pretty small anyway. But I thought, contents, that looks pretty good. The stories are numbered the way they need to be. So I got into the introduction, and I thought, wait a minute. The font is so tiny. This is not, I'm sure people with great eyesight could read this no problem, but the font did not look that tiny when I previewed this. So let's take our first story, which is a fantastic story, by the way, called Midnight Mass by Sue Walsh, who's just a wonderful author. All these authors are so wonderful. But we started off with this story, just a great story. And I thought, boy, the graphic looks great. The title looks great. Sue's name, this pretty much looks the way I want it to look, but that font. And I do have some vision issues. I've been nearsighted my whole life, very correctable with prescription lenses. But still, I thought, this is really, really tiny. The spacing looked a little off. And I just thought, my partner here is looking at the dog next door. And I just thought, I'm not happy with that. So back to the drawing board. One of the lovely things about going indie is you have so much control of the process. Again, I've talked about this in other videos, but what this means is if you find a typo 6 months after a book has been published, you can literally fix it, re-upload it, and Amazon at least will automatically fix that in for people who have already downloaded the ebook. So if they are sort of plugged in to their Kindle library, for instance, Amazon will actually update the book to reflect those changes, which is super cool. Obviously, it can't fix changes in previous paperbacks that were sold, but it will fix them for paperbacks moving forward. So back to the drawing board I went, knowing what I wanted to fix. Didn't redesign the cover, resized the cover, went into my software where I did that, resized it to make sure that white line was no longer there. Okay, and I got this next proof. It took about a week, maybe less, maybe 5 days. Super happy, everything fit. I had made everything a little bigger, so the authors' names were a little bit bigger. Things were just centered a little bit differently. Worked great. Looked at the spine, looked great. Very, very happy. The back cover, fantastic. Everything's just how I wanted it to be. And I also decided, if you look at this first one, which is my first proof, look how much darker it is. I thought that's a little distracting for a back cover. So I went in, lightened that up. I also wanted to add a little more text on the back, a little more copy back there. And so I did. And so then the final test, and this was nerve-wracking because I thought, okay, the cover's looking good. Can we hope And again, title page, great. Copyright page, yeah, a little more readable. Contents look good. And right away I could see this font. Let's see, I get it where it needs to be. Again, you probably can't see it too well, but much more readable and much more what I was looking for. Because let's face it, hopefully people are reading these stories in the wintertime. Maybe the lighting is low. Maybe they're just curled up on the couch with a cup of hot cocoa by the Christmas tree and they're reading these stories. I don't want them to have to, have a magnifying glass out to read these. So that in a nutshell, and I kept the graphics the same, titles of stories and authors' names. I can double check that. They changed a little bit. They might have gotten a little bit bigger, but everything's just clear and lovely. And I always go through and I look at every single page. Special focus on the beginnings of stories. For instance, I wanted drop caps here, so I definitely had those in there. I wanted my nice little graphic, my little Christmas trees. And then I wanted to check that the author bios at the ends of the stories were in what I call block quote format. I teach a lot of classes where APA is used, APA formatting, and block quotes are a thing. And so I wanted that sort of block quote format for the bios. You can see it's sort of square and it's indented and it's justified left, justified right, and it is pretty much centered. Right? So it's like a little square of text. I also look at the ends of stories to make sure there aren't any little funky, just one word, the widows it's called widows and orphans in formatting. You don't want to have like one word hanging out on another page, for example. So overall, I was super, super happy. Everything worked out fine, including the, at the end, the thank you for reading. I like to always put a note in for readers to, thank them for reading and please leave a review and all that kind of stuff, because discoverability is tough these days. A lot of people are indie publishing, and in addition to all the people who are traditionally published, discoverability is tough. If you don't have the budget that a huge publisher has for advertising, for getting the word out there, for book conventions, for getting the top reviewers, it can be really tough. So I always rely on readers to leave comments. This will likely be a very slow burn, this anthology, and I'm hoping it will be, no pun intended, or maybe a pun is intended, what I consider to be an evergreen book, where it just year after year will hopefully find more readers. These are such fantastic authors, and they wrote some really great pieces, very accessible, very readable, they're quick reads. So I have been very, very, very pleased with how this came out. So all of this is to plug this anthology for you all. So it's very reasonable on Amazon. It's about to get more reasonable for Black Friday, the week of Black Friday. So keep your eye on that. This is 2023, by the way, when I am recording this video. I will probably do the same in future years for this anthology. So it's to plug this and plug these authors, and also to reinforce for you, to underscore the importance of doing your due diligence, I covered up the part I wanted to show. Doing your due diligence and doing a thorough proofing process as the very last part of your editing process, so that eventually what you are winding up with is a beautiful, beautiful book without that gray bar in front, and just everything looks good and it's squared away, and it's a product that you can really be proud of. And on behalf of the authors, if you're publishing other authors, that they too can be proud of. It's really, really important. So that's all I've got for you today. Have a good one.